If you're using QuickBooks Online for your accounts payable process, entering bills, paying your vendors, and then ultimately also using your bank feeds, there is a lot more happening behind the scenes than you might originally think. So today, let's go ahead and walk through this entire process end to end, entering a bill, recording the payment, matching the transaction with the bank feed, and let's look at our reports at each stage of this process so that we can really see what's happening behind the scenes. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So for today, the bill that I have as a sample is from a vendor that provides my little fake company here with co-working space. So I am going to go ahead and manually enter this bill to show you what the process looks like. But I also want to show you when you go into the plus new create and then bill under vendor, you do have this little option right here. And if you pop this out, this is the QuickBooks feed feature. Okay. And it is basically an AI enabled feature where you can drag and drop a PDF or different file type here. And QuickBooks will read out all of the information. It does actually work pretty well. And I have a separate video on that particular feature, which I will link. But I want to show you the whole process end to end without using the AI features for today. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. So the vendor is co-working space. And my terms with them are net 30. The bill date here, for the sake of the example, is 2/15. And you can see QuickBooks automatically calculates the due date for me based on the terms. I do have a bill number here. And then I want to go into the meat and potatoes portion of bill entry, which is the category and the description and the amount, right? Now you can see here, you can have multiple lines on a bill, and same as on an invoice, you can split it out into however many different categories or buckets you would like. This one only has a single line item on it, so we're keeping it simple, and it is for rent. Now I am actually going to take a moment. I'm going to go over to my other screen over here where the bill is so that I can copy and paste the description right in here because I don't want to mess up anything. I want to make sure that I have exactly what is showing on the bill just for the sake of everything matching up nicely. The amount is $900, okay? Now I could add an additional memo if I would like. I can also, and I do recommend doing this whenever you have documentation, I can go ahead and actually drag and drop a copy of the bill over here into the add attachments section. And basically what this is going to do is it is going to mean that a copy of the bill shows up with the transaction. Now, I get that this might not make sense to do for every single transaction that you interact with, okay? There are some that are for relatively nominal amounts, and that is an additional step in the grand scheme of things. But it also really works fantastically to shore up your documentation, right? If any of the other stakeholders in your company are looking at your information, they have additional data available at their fingertips without having to request it from you, okay? Biggest driver on this that I always use as my example is your CPA at the end of the year, right? If you're attaching all of the supporting documentation for large purchases and things like that, your CPA is ultimately going to have fewer questions for you, and that means a more expedited tax return process, which is phenomenal, okay? All right, so we have that. Now I will say if you had used the feed feature, it would have filled this information in and it would automatically attach the document that you had provided to the transaction. So that is very nice as well. So now that I have this bill entered, I'm going to go ahead and hit save and close. So what happens to that bill now that it has been entered in QuickBooks Online? Well, it's going to show up in a few different places. Now, first and foremost, if your business is on accrual basis accounting, that bill is already going to be visible on your profit and loss statement, okay? Because accrual basis accounting deals with expenses and income at the time they're occurring versus when cash changes hands. It is a very big and distinct difference that we're dealing with. However, if you use cash basis accounting, this technically will not show up on any of your reports because on cash basis accounting, we don't deal with accounts payable or accounts receivable, okay? However, it will show up on a report showing you what you owe so that you can go through the process of paying your bills and make sure that you're paying your vendors in a timely manner. So let's go ahead and see which reports it shows up on. If I go to standard reports here and then go to, we'll go to profit and loss and we'll look at it on an accrual basis. So if I go and look at it for February, we can see right here, I do have rent of $1,800, okay? So when I click into this, what we'll likely see is one is the bill, which I just entered, and the other is a transaction that came straight through my bank feed, okay? But we can see that if we are on accrual basis, both are showing up. Now, if I toggle this up here to just cash basis under accounting method, we're going to see that the bill disappears and we're only seeing the amount that was paid out at the time, okay? But once again, under accrual basis, I'm going to see this showing up, okay? Same thing if I go and look at my balance sheet. On accrual basis, I am going to see this particular transaction showing as an amount in accounts payable, okay, under my current liabilities. So if I click here on accounts payable, one of the things that I will see is this $900 bill from co-working space, okay? So that is where this shows up on accrual basis. Again, if we go back to the overall report and if I run it on cash basis instead, I want you to pay attention to two accounts here. I have accounts receivable right here and I have accounts payable right here. If I toggle this to cash, we'll see that both of those disappear. So I no longer have accounts receivable and I no longer have accounts payable, okay? So that is the difference there between cash and accrual basis accounting, and it is an issue of timing. Do we recognize expenses and income when we send an invoice to a customer or when we receive the bill from the vendor? Or are we recognizing those income and expenses when the cash actually changes hands, which may be at a different time, okay? Now, the final place that this is going to show up, and this is where I would say if you're entering bills, even if you're on cash basis accounting, this is probably the report that you're going to be relying on most, is in your accounts payable aging summary. Okay, so if I click here, it is going to show me all of the bills that are currently outstanding to all of my vendors. Okay, and it's also going to tell me how long they have been outstanding. So we can see here, it makes sense that that bill, which was from February, and I only just entered it, is in the 1 to 30 aging bucket, right? I also do have an amount in the current aging bucket. So all of this is what we would expect to see, okay? Our accounts payable aging summary, similar to our accounts receivable aging summary, tells us what is outstanding, right? This one tells us what we owe to our vendors, and the accounts receivable summary tells us what our clients owe to us, okay? That is the only difference between those two reports, but they do it in a very similar format. So let's say that, obviously I want to go ahead and get this bill paid at this point. And, at the point of recording this video, it actually is a touch late. Thank goodness this is only a sample company and I'm only playing around in here. But let's go ahead and walk through the process of making a payment against that bill and then finally look at how that works out on the bank feed side, okay? So in order to record payment against a bill, I would want to go up to the plus create button here and then select pay bills. And we can see what shows up is what was on our accounts payable aging summary, these two bills that have been entered, okay? Now, to record this payment, I actually did process the payment on 3/1. I just haven't yet recorded it. So I'm going to go ahead and record that now. It is coming out of my business checking account, but you can see you can select different places to pay this from, including a credit card. If a vendor allows you to pay a bill with a credit card and you want to do that, you can. And you can even tell QuickBooks how that all unfolded so that all of your reports and all of your bank feeds line up. But for the sake of this example, it is my business checking account. The payment date was 03/02. And what I tend to do if I am recording ACH payments, I have a naming mechanism that I use for those payments. I will do ACH, the year code, 4-digit year code, followed by a 2-digit month code and a 2-digit day code. Okay. Now, if you're processing multiple ACH payments on the same day, you can always do 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. But this is just how I do it so that things line up. It is also possible that when you process payments from your bank, they will provide you with a confirmation number basically, and you could always use that as the payment number if you would like. Now I'm going to go ahead and mark the invoice, or the bill rather, that I am trying to pay here. And once I do that, I can hit save and close. Now, something to keep in mind is that for the sake of this example, and oftentimes in QuickBooks, we are not actually processing the payment. Okay, if we are cutting checks, that's great. We can print checks through the QuickBooks system and then we can send those out in the mail. QuickBooks does also have a bill pay function for an additional fee that you can use to actually process vendor payments directly through the software here. There are also third-party plugins that you can use, such as Melio and Bill.com, okay? Now, that being said, you are not always actually enacting a real-world payment when you are doing this, okay? In this file, because I don't have an actual bank account set up with it, and I'm only doing this as a sample, there is no real-world transaction occurring. I am simply recording a transaction that is then happening on the bank side. Right? Now you can see there is the option to save and or schedule payment. Okay, so if I were doing checks, I would want to save and print those checks. If I were actually going to schedule the payment through the QuickBooks Bill Pay option, I would want to hit schedule payment. But again, for this, I've already processed the payment in this hypothetical situation from my bank, so I am only recording it here in QuickBooks. So I'm going to hit save and close for this. So what has happened on our reports now? Let's go back and take a look. Now, nothing will have changed on our profit and loss on an accrual basis, okay? But on a cash basis, we are now telling QuickBooks that we have actually processed that payment, so it will show up on cash basis reports. But the most important thing that I want to show you is actually what happens on that accounts payable aging summary. So let's go ahead and take a look. When I go back in there now, we can see that that bill for $900 is no longer here, okay? And that is what we would expect to see. We've told QuickBooks that we have paid it. So let's go ahead and move on to the final step now, which is getting what we have recorded in QuickBooks, the bill, the payment against it, to match up with our bank feeds, which is the automation side. So if I go to my bank feeds, which you can do either by going into your bookmarks section if you have it bookmarked, or if you go back to home and then select accounting, you can go into bank transactions. That is the first option that pops up. So we can see here, I actually did process a payment against this, but QuickBooks is not offering it up as a match. That is something that I want to be aware of as a business owner, because the whole system has to be working together. Otherwise, I will be duplicating transactions, and that's going to throw my reconciliations into a total chaotic mess. Okay. So here, what we see is a payment out of my bank account on 3/2 of 2026 for $900 to that co-working space. Okay. And QuickBooks is offering a rule that has been applied to rent. Now, that is technically correct. And if I hadn't entered a bill in QuickBooks, I could absolutely go ahead and simply add this as a transaction. However, since I have entered the bill, marked the bill as paid, if I do this now, I'm going to be doubling that expense, and I don't want to do that. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to toggle from categorize to match, and we are going to find that transaction. And sure enough, we see here we have this bill payment on 3/2 of 2026 for $900 to co-working space, okay? If I put a check mark right here, we're going to see that the selected amount is going to become $900 and the difference is going to become 0. That is what we want. So I will do that. And there we go. I have now matched the transaction that came through my bank feed with the bill payment, okay? This is a really great example of QuickBooks doing its best and mostly doing a good job, but occasionally having some errors and issues where you might end up really struggling to get everything to line up. If I don't match this transaction right now, it's actually going to create 2 transactions on my bank register and ultimately on my profit and loss, which means that unless I catch that in reconciliation and fix it, I am overstating my expenses, okay? This is something that will ultimately usually get cleaned up in the reconciliation process, but it is easier if we are just aware of what we are doing and take the time to make sure that we are matching things up when that is available on the books, okay? Now I'm going to go ahead, and I'm actually not going to save this. I'm going to actually add the transaction and show you what this would end up looking like. So if I add this transaction, if I go ahead and post it, let's go ahead and look at our bank register and see what would have happened. I will have to go back to March 2nd here. Whoops, went a little too far. So we can see I have 2 transactions, both for $900. One is the bill, and one is the rent expense, okay? But we can see that one of them doesn't have anything here, and one of them has the C and the little green boxes. That tells me that this transaction came from my bank feed, okay? Now, let me show you how to fix this issue, because you would want to fix it before you go through the reconciliation process. If I go back to bank transactions right here, and then go to posted, I will be able to find that transaction for $900 that was classified to rent. I'm going to hit undo. This is going to pull this transaction back to my pending tab so that I can fix it. Now that it's back here, I am going to go through that process of correctly matching the transaction. And now let's go look at our bank register and see what it looks like. So now if I go down there, I see that I only have the one transaction for $900. It is the bill payment, and I have the little cleared and this little green box, which means that it came through my bank feed. All right, this is the full life cycle of a bill in QuickBooks Online. This is everything that's happening behind the scenes when we enter bills, when we pay them, and ultimately when we match them on our bank transactions tab, okay? We want to be very sure that we are going through that whole process so that we aren't creating extra work and duplicates for ourselves to deal with down the road. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Holly from Accrual Mistress Bookkeeping and Consulting. I do hope you found this helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave those in the comments below. I will get to all of them.